Sacramento-based creative director with 14 years of experience shaping design and strategy. At Honey, the design and marketing studio she's called home for over a decade, she has built and guided countless brands while recently expanding her leadership to oversee both design and marketing teams. Her perspective is rooted in cross-disciplinary art and experiential design, where she's explored the dialogue between space, community, and physical form. This foundation informs her process-driven approach, guiding her team to create work with depth and authenticity. Everyone welcome Ash.
Oh, I have to hold this.
You do. We don't have to stand today. Sorry.
Great. That's all right. Hi, good morning. I'm gonna open this up. Does it fit? Okay. Wow. Molly, thank you for the intro and for inviting me to speak today. I was actually just talking to a few people before when we were all mingling, and I actually volunteered with Creative Mornings with some of these folks years ago. I think we were talking like almost 10 years ago now, when it was first brought to Sacramento, and I helped out with some graphics, some photography, and that experience was just amazing. And seeing how Creative Mornings has evolved since then and grown and has been such an important part of this community is just incredible. And I'm just so honored to be finally speaking up here today. So just wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming out, and I'm just super honored to be here. So here we go. When Molly told me the theme was Blossom, it immediately resonated on so many levels, which I'll get into a little bit later. But first, a colleague of mine joked that I should wear a Blossom hat, like from the 90s show, which reminded me of this photo of me in a Blossom hat with a space-themed backdrop. The best. We'll get to that later. But how many of you are actually morning people? Wow, more than I thought. That's awesome. The older I get, the more I feel like I become a morning person. I love the slow mornings with coffee, while the sun rises, my toddler is still snoozing. I find a lot of energy in these moments. And the morning Molly asked me if I was interested in speaking, I observed something super fascinating to me that I think strangely really relates to the theme of Blossom. So my alarm went off. It was like the crack of dawn, kind of dark, but I could still see. I don't really like turning lights on in the morning. My husband calls me a vampire. But anyway, I slipped out of bed, went over to my dresser to grab a sweatshirt, and I noticed something that I hadn't paid attention to before. Everything I was perceiving seemed to be in black and white, and this is kind of like the closest visual I could get to what I was perceiving. So it turns out I was experiencing either probably light adaptation or sleep inertia effects. But don't worry, this talk is not about the scientific processes of these details, but I had never noticed it before, and suddenly I'm thinking, how many mornings have I breezed through this exact moment without even realizing that something like super interesting was happening? For that few second moment, it just got me thinking of all of these threshold spaces that we maybe move through without even paying attention to throughout our days, and creatively, how many opportunities we might be missing. So as one does, I went down a rabbit hole trying to find meaning in what I was experiencing. And what I realized was, in this moment, this time and space, this thing that was happening was none other than liminal space. And liminal space is a threshold. It's an in-between. Anthropologists use this term to describe transformative moments in cultures and rituals, but I think it applies perfectly to creative work. In other words, it's not where you were, not where you're going, but that space of transition. Can you guys hear me okay? Am I talking into the mic? It's like, I don't use mics a lot. So we've all been in these spaces, whether physically or conceptually. Hotel hallways and gas stations at 2 a.m., empty parking garages, the quiet stillness after a snowfall, empty streets and harbors, moving day when your stuff is gone, but you haven't settled anywhere, and in my recent case, the moment between sleep and wake. Some of these feel fleeting, but sometimes you can live in liminal spaces for months. I lived in Germany for a year, working remotely at Honey, 9 hours ahead, not home, but not really there forever. Being suspended between these two worlds really forced me to see a lot of things differently in my work, processes, communication, with my team and clients, and how I even approach problems. Living car-free in a new city also meant that I was walking everywhere, which gave me tons of small moments to notice, the details that, sometimes I would have otherwise missed. And I didn't realize that my time in Germany experience was essentially an extended liminal space for me, until I started exploring this concept a little bit further. And we don't need to move to another country to experience this. As creatives, we're constantly navigating these in-between spaces. So think about your own process, that moment of uncertainty before breakthrough moments emerge, the space between problem and solution, when a sketch starts to become something real, a brand starts to come out of a mood board and start forming. You have a sketch, but you're trying to capture an idea, but it's not refined yet. It's all about this place in between inspiration and execution. The iterative space between concepts is where those interesting ideas emerge. I think blossoming happens in liminal spaces. Like a bud about to bloom, the transformation occurs in that dynamic middle ground. So the more I continued to build on this topic, the more I realized how relevant the concept of liminal space was to me this past year. I experienced it professionally when I expanded my role from just having oversight over the design team and expanded to both design and marketing teams at Honey, leading a team of 8 across both disciplines. So previously, I had led the design team, and our strategy director led the marketing team. And while we would work really closely together, I had been more focused on the design side. So even though I've always been a strategic creative, and I've been a creative director for nearly a decade, directly overseeing both of these teams has been such a fun, welcoming challenge. And what I've learned from operating in this transitional leadership space is that it requires humility and empathy. I'm learning from my teams as much as I'm guiding the work. The interesting thing about growth, in my opinion, is that it really never stops. Even as an experienced leader, this transition that I went through just continues to evolve myself as a leader and shape the type of leader that I really want to be. And I think what's so cool is that in this process, I am totally not the same leader I was a year ago that I am now today. And from a workflow perspective, what's been really exciting is to be able to guide projects more closely from the strategic thinking, those initial, really strategic elements of our project, all the way through design. And so having that oversight and visibility has been just really exciting. And though I've always been involved in both, this bridge feels much more complete now. So that experience of navigating my own leadership transition got me thinking about how we can be more intentional in these spaces. So you might be wondering, how do we actually work within liminal moments rather than just stumbling upon them? Or how do we design, create, be inspired by the space between? As leaders, how do we inspire these threshold spaces for our teams? First, protect what some call the messy middle. That's where ideas spark, bloom, transform. We all have our versions of creative chaos where, it's like messy artboards, scattered Post-it notes, screenshots on your desktop. I know some of you out there have a million screenshots on your desktop. But embrace these stream of consciousness moments and stages in your work. Also, make sure you're establishing check-in moments with yourself and your team to make sure you can take a step back, look at the ideas, the mess from a holistic lens, and remember to have those moments where you're going back to that strategy and reel it in once in a while and pivot if needed. In this middle space, give yourself and your team permission to explore wild directions. Some of my best work has come from concepts that felt way too out there at first, which you know. Cross-pollination between disciplines. See what I did there? Blossom. This disrupts conventional thinking and introduces fresh perspectives that can break through creative. In my role overseeing both design and marketing teams at Honey, I've seen how like a marketing insight, for example, about audience behavior can completely shift a design direction, or vice versa, a designer can inspire a tagline or a messaging direction. Our marketing team sits in on our design critiques and offers feedback and great perspective. And same with designers. They help with strategy and give their feedback and perspective on the strategic elements of our work. And I think that intersection of design and marketing is where our most strategic work emerges. Try this next time you're stuck. Grab someone who has nothing to do with your project or even your industry and just explain your problem. Don't ask them to solve it, just talk it through. There's something about talking through a problem or what you're working on that sometimes unlocks something new that you haven't thought of before, or a new perspective, or brings up a word that like inspires something. Start paying attention to those transition moments in your day. Your commute, your coffee break, a quick walk. In an age of constant scrolling and filling every second with like being on, acknowledge those liminal opportunities throughout your day. Identify when you're most creatively perceptive and protect that time. For me, it's in the mornings, and oftentimes I'll walk my daughter to school, and on the way home, I'll just have that moment, that time to really like think creatively and have that space before I jump into my workflow. Something that's also helpful for me is keeping voice memos or tracking thoughts in my notes on my phone. Those sparking moments that happen in the shower where like I'm like, I gotta write this down and hurry up and go to my phone. My finger's still wet, you know, and you're like typing in, but you never know when those ideas can like fuel a different piece of your work, or just kind of like writing something down helps kind of make that moment a little bit more concrete. Maybe this week, notice a transition moment in your day, a few minutes between meetings or while you're making dinner. Give yourself permission to just like be present and be in it. Leaders, we need to create liminal space for our teams. This means exploring and being intentional about protecting time and space for this kind of exploration. Whether it's like blocking focused work time on your calendar, creating buffer space between meetings, which I will be honest, is a conversation that me and my team are having right now about ways that we can build more intentional downtime in our workflow. As creative director, it is not my job to have the breakthrough moments. It is my job to create space for my incredibly talented team to have those moments. And sometimes that means protecting a team member when they're in those uncertain phases, when they're, when their ideas are blooming and they're in those sketching phases. I always advocate for stepping away, coming back with fresh eyes, or just having a conversation that gets to the root of what they're trying to express. Sometimes it's noticing when someone's half-baked idea in the fishbowl, that's what we call our workspace, is actually just what the project needs. Okay, I don't want to mess up again, so I'm gonna, because I got a lot of animations in here. So a great example of this that I wanted to share is the brand naming process. everyone's throwing out ideas. The energy is super high. And then eventually it like kind of starts to fizzle. People get a little tired. But then someone will mutter something under their breath or post something quietly to Slack or start to say something and then be like, oh, no, that's silly. Don't, no. But those are the moments that I've learned to catch, because oftentimes what they're hesitating about is like exactly what's worth exploring, right? Like you guys know when someone has that idea and you're like, wait a minute, what did you just say? And my experience is that breakthroughs rarely happen in those official brainstorms. The strategy obviously sets the foundation, but the breakthrough moments, it's often in Slack threads that keep going after a meeting or an official connect, or those informal in-between moments that you have where the magic really comes to life. Surprise. One recent example was naming Abridged. Abridged is a community-first journalism service for PBS KVIE. As we were developing the name and brand identity, I was listening to the conversations happening in our workspace over Slack. These informal exchanges building upon each other until suddenly Abridged started to feel right. You can see the energy if you can, maybe not in the back. So this obviously came from like many hours of brainstorming from my team, going down various paths, noticing the nuances, until that final name started to become like the one. And I have to say, my team is incredible. They are the reason I'm passionate about this work and why creating space for their ideas matters so much. This moment of this naming process and brand process really came from this exact kind of cross-pollination and paying attention to those in-between moments. The best ideas rarely come while sitting at your computer trying to force them. They come from organic moments of collaboration and conversation, even if those conversations happen on Slack. So how do you harness these in-between moments? For me, I've learned to recognize when I'm in liminal space, like when I'm getting ready in the morning, when I'm not actively like trying to think about anything in particular, not trying to solve anything, right? That's when I can take a step back and potentially like see a whole problem differently, whether it's like, what does the client actually need in this presentation today? Or like, what if we tried this scenario like a whole different way? Most of the connections that I'm sharing in this talk actually came to me in these types of moments. Shower thoughts, bike rides, not while sitting at my computer to force it. It's like those quiet moments really let me access like the bigger picture that sometimes gets lost when you're like super into the details. And I'm not saying at all to always be thinking about your work, but pay attention to when those moments do appear, whether it's a moment of reflection or inspiration. And I'm sure we all have those moments when inspiration sparks out of nowhere. Mine usually starts with something super random. Apparently, space has been a theme for me for a hot minute. Because for years, I've had this habit of sketching UFOs when I start a project. Even if it clearly has nothing to do with space. Most of our projects at Honey are unclassified. But those subconscious moments, like when I'm digesting strategy, aligning creative direction with the client's vision, that's liminal territory to me. Things aren't set in stone yet. Ideas are floating around. And apparently so are UFOs, because I always draw them. And sometimes they come with some beam up moments. Yeah, they get weird. But I think it's kind of the perfect metaphor for what we do as creatives. We're constantly pulling ideas out of their normal context and dropping them somewhere, sometimes completely unexpected. So one of these sketches seen here was the beginning of kind of a silly idea for a wine label. In my mind, I was thinking about storytelling, composition, the basics. And when I shared with the Honey team, we began exploring how to communicate this concept of artfully crafted wine, enjoyed without pretension, surrounded by good laughs, good friends, good food, just a good time with good friends. So sketches and conceptual ideas turned into the final invited series labels with custom illustrations that balance Northern California and Italian vibes, and messaging that shows scenes where people connect and engage with the wine as the focal point. All of this stemmed from an obscure place, from a UFO, beaming up a ghost, having a chill glass of wine at a floating table. But again, the beauty isn't that a weird or random sketch can become real work. It's giving yourself that permission to be completely off topic that often lead exactly where you need to go. And ultimately, I think it creates more interesting work. And sometimes being unafraid to get weird means you love your weirdness so much that it becomes a shirt or a tattoo. The thing about liminal spaces is that they really are everywhere when you start paying attention. Just like the morning when I noticed I was seeing the world in black and white for just a few seconds. Every project has them. Every creative process lives in them. They can be somewhat uncomfortable because nothing feels certain, but I think that uncertainty can open a lot of new ideas. When I was living in Germany, existing between two cultures, the threshold space made me so much more aware of details I hadn't necessarily noticed before. And now, and in my expanded leadership role, I'm experiencing that same kind of awareness, always evolving how I'm leading both design and marketing teams. I think when we rush past these uncertain moments and try to force it too quickly, we often end up with safe, predictable work that doesn't surprise anyone and often ourselves. So here are a few takeaways to embrace the in-between. Start noticing liminal spaces as creative opportunities. You may already be doing this, but start to reflect on how you're spending that time. Do you start to notice anything different? Protect what some call the messy middle, where ideas manifest. Create your own creative chaos, embrace it, the uncertain exploration phase, and be sure to make time for the messy. I think that's where the magic happens. Pay attention to your transition moments, your commute, your coffee break, your bike ride, the moments between sleep and wake. I think those moments are when your brain is like on autopilot, right? You're not actively trying to focus on anything in particular. Try to next time think about where is your mind wandering? Where are you taking it? And can you kind of draw inspiration from that area? Give yourself permission to get weird and explore in certain directions. Every creative process has room for unexpected detours, and sometimes they'll lead you to the most interesting work. Question assumptions you didn't even know you had about your process, your audience, your industry. Sometimes stepping outside of your typical world shows you patterns that you haven't noticed before. And if you lead others, try to create space for your team to have their own breakthrough moments. Catch those hesitant ideas and stay present for the unexpected connections. Pay attention to the Slack threads that keep going after the meetings end. When we learn to sit in the discomfort of not quite knowing, that's where the best ideas happen. That's where we blossom. Thank you.